And I was like, I really feel like this space is missing, specifically like the online business space, coaching space is missing DEI and DEI educators. I know there's some out here that exist, but there's not many, and nobody's really talking to my bubble about this. So I decided to do a workshop, and it was nothing like I'd ever done before. I was like, hey everyone, this is completely off topic. I do talk about this stuff. I'm very passionate. Would you be interested in doing a workshop? And it sold out immediately. It was just like, bam.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Welcome to Represented, the podcast. I'm Aniki Shuru, racial equity coach for online business owners who want to be intentionally inclusive by building a business that is racially equitable. I created this podcast to normalize a conversation around racial inclusion so that fear is no longer the barrier that gets in the way of doing this work. This isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Whether you're taking your first steps or you're well-versed in the journey towards racial equity, this space is for you. So welcome home, friend. Let's get started.
From coast to coast, around the globe, we are represented.
Where are you from? Really? No, originally, where are you from? Can I touch your hair? Your English sounds so good. Nah, I don't see color. Those statements I've shared are just some of the daily microaggressions that people of color face on a regular basis when they occupy white spaces. Microaggressions are subtle yet negative racial messages that leave the person on the receiving end feeling hurt, humiliated, and even disrespected. You may have used these kinds of statements to start a conversation or even break ice with a person of color, but didn't realize the harm you were causing. That's why I've created a free microaggressions guide with 5 of the commonly made microaggressions in online coaching spaces that you need to know about and what you can do or say instead. Head over to anikishuru.com/micro to download your free guide. That's Anikishuru, GICHURU.com/micro, MICRO. Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Represented Podcast with Aniki Shuru. Today, I am joined by Simone McNish, and I've been following her for a little while. Actually, not a little, a while, a long, long while, maybe the past 4 years. And I've just seen her work just emerge and grow. And it's just been beautiful to follow a fellow DEI practitioner whom we share some really aligned values. And so, Simone, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here and to be talking with you.
I can't wait to see where this conversation goes. And I would love you to begin by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do for those who may not have heard of you before.
Definitely. Well, my name is Simone McNish, as you mentioned, and I am a DEI practitioner and a facilitator and consultant. And so what I do for small business owners and for larger organizations and corporation is that I help them in 2 main areas, one being inclusive content, so making sure their communications are inclusive, thinking about language, marketing, thinking about including different groups of people who have been historically excluded. And for organizations, I kind of work with the broader DEI umbrella. So a lot around belonging, hiring, some around marketing and inclusive content, and leadership as well. So I've worked with some leaders on how to be a little bit more inclusive. So yeah, that's one part of my business. And then what I'm also very passionate about is equitable pricing. So making sure that pricing for entrepreneurs is fair. And this is just something I think I have fallen into because I have been on the other side of unfair
Yeah.
pricing practices, and even have been taught some unfair pricing practices that I
Mm.
had to unlearn and relearn. So that's something I'm really passionate about, things like scholarships and sliding scale and payment plans, so we can all collectively thrive.
Absolutely. I love that you mentioned about equitable pricing because there's a lot I feel that I have been empowered by you when I have been part of programs,
Mhm.
part of coaching groups where I have felt it doesn't quite feel right. It feels
Right.
like those who can afford it are the ones who are being given more privilege and allowances, and those who are not are the ones who are carrying it's almost like you're being penalized for not being able to afford
Mhm.
through payment plans and all sorts of things. And we will get to that. But I just wanted to mention, I felt like you gave me the language around it. Sometimes when you just have that hunch and you're like, something
Mhm.
doesn't feel right here, but I just don't know how yet to articulate that. And I came
Mhm.
across, I think it would have been a reel that you did, or some of your content, or perhaps maybe through your mailing list, because I'm a subscriber. And I was like, Simone has just given me language here that I didn't have before, and I felt
Mhm.
empowered in my own stance.
Oh,
And so, thank you very much for that. There are ways that people make a difference and you don't even realize it. There are people from across the globe who are watching and
yeah.
learning. And so take that
Oh my
with you. Just know that
gosh.
you've
Thank
inspired me in so many
you.
ways.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. What great feedback and a great compliment. I do take that to heart because, we spend so much time on our emails and communication and thinking about how to break things down in a way that's digestible and understandable and not too confusing, because I think a lot of this is like really complex topics and
Yes.
complex systems of inequity. And you're like, how do I break this down? How do I bring this into my own work? So I
Mm.
really appreciate that feedback.
And also just to add on, I love that you approach this work from a learner's perspective. You're not coming in and cracking the whip and saying, this is how y'all need to do it. This is the way.
No.
I feel like, being students of life, like we are constantly evolving. Some of the things we subscribed to 4 years ago, we're not doing that anymore because we grow, we evolve, we understand people's
Mhm.
needs a little bit more. We understand that perhaps what we were doing was not exactly helpful. It was probably even harmful. So, how can we continue to have that learner's mindset? How can we continue to evolve? And I think that's what has always made me gravitate to your teaching and the way you do and say
Mhm.
things. And so, yeah, thanks so much. So, how did you arrive here at DEI? I think I may have seen somewhere, Simone, where you said you were doing social media content or
Mhm.
management, if I'm not too wrong.
Yeah.
But how did you arrive here? What was the catalyst?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it was such an interesting journey, and you did read that right. I started my business as a social media consultant because I have a background in marketing. I've spent 6 years in marketing and advertising, actually in the tech field. And so I've always loved social media, and I was honestly just looking for extra ways to bring in additional income. I've always been a person who loves being on the pulse, like having my finger on the pulse of like what's trending, what's interesting. And I just felt social media was a great blend of my skills and, what I know and what I'm passionate about. So I started doing social media consulting. Very quickly, my clients were mainly Black women. It was people from my network it was, and then I started expanding out to people I didn't know, which was really interesting and cool. Hiring me for social media consulting, coaching on video. Video and technology is a really big passion of mine as well. I just don't talk about it as much anymore, but you know, I started working with lots of different women and specifically Black women, and was starting to hear all of these stories about being excluded from coaching programs, and having really kind of strange interactions with people. And it was kind of giving me little red flags. And I'm like, what is going on, like, with this online business industry? Because I was kind of new to the industry. And my background in school is communication in like university and college. I studied communication with a focus on intercultural communication and race and ethnicity. And so I already knew a lot of these things. I'd been studying them for years, but I started kind of having these just organic conversations on social media about diversity, equity, inclusion, privilege, a lot around privilege, and the things I was seeing on this online space. And, you know, as a marketer, things that I was talking about, social media, yeah, some people like them. But when I started talking about inclusion in 2019, all of a sudden people were like, oh my gosh, like, tell me more about this. Like, this is what we want to hear about. This is such an interesting message. And I'm kind of thinking, oh, this is kind of common sense. It's not common sense to everyone. And so I started talking about it. I got this weird kind of spiritual nudge, this intuitive feeling in early 2020. I had been talking about it with my business coach, and I was like, I really feel like this space is missing, specifically like the online business space, coaching space is missing DEI and DEI educators. I know there's some out here that exist, but there's not many, and nobody's really talking to my bubble about this. So I decided to do a workshop, and it was nothing like I'd ever done before. I was like, hey everyone, this is completely off topic. I do talk about this stuff. I'm very passionate. Would you be interested in doing a workshop? And it sold out immediately. It was just like, bam. It was just like 30 seats filled in a little workshop really, really quickly.
Oh
And I
my
was like,
gosh.
whoa, what's
What was
happening?
what was the topic about?
It was called Diversity, Inclusion, and Privilege for Entrepreneurs. And so
Wow.
specifically geared towards small business owners and entrepreneurs, because one of the things about the DEI industry is it's very much geared towards academia or academia. I can never say the word right, but academics, I should say,
Yeah.
and also like organizations. So like big
Mhm.
companies. And
Yes.
for the little individuals, I mean, we're not little, we're small but mighty.
Hmm.
We There's not a lot of DEI that's targeted towards like having a small business. Like, what do you
Absolutely.
do? What can you do, you know?
Absolutely. Wow, that is incredible to have that uptake. And I take it that this was before the 2020 racial awakening that was happening globally, right?
It was actually very wild. I got off my very first workshop because this was before. I mean, you know, as we know, there had been things that had been happening, injustices that had been, you know, happening, but this big catalyst, this big moment of the murder of George Floyd, that hadn't happened yet. But as I got off the call, or got off the virtual workshop call, opened my phone, I was decompressing, and I see this news that, you know, this tragedy has happened, like at the end of that call. And I was like, what is happening? And then it just snowballed, and
Wow,
there
that's
was just so many
incredible.
things, yeah, that happened after that. And then I was just booked out immediately. Like, it was just like, okay, well,
Mhm.
here's the call. Are you going to answer it, or are you going to be scared? So yeah, the timing was unfortunate, but it was also like really interesting, like the way I
Mhm.
was like, oh, maybe we could do this workshop. I feel like there's a gap, there's a need, and then it really just it got it got very it went very fast after that, I should say.
Wow, that is so interesting. And a little bit later on, we're going to talk about the cycles of this work because we have peak times when there's a lot of demand, but we
Yeah.
also have times when it's really quiet and people are
Yeah.
not asking to do this work or have kind of just parked it to the side and this is not a priority for them. How can
Yeah.
we normalize this and make it such that, particularly in the coaching industry, that this is an ongoing thing? It's not something that you just have a knee-jerk reaction to when
Yeah.
everybody's kind of having an awakening or feeling that this needs to be centered, but it's something that is part of who you are. It's part of your value system. It's part of how you
Yes.
operate your business. And
Mhm.
I would love to know, Simone, um, supporting both organizations and
Mhm.
entrepreneurs, what would you say is the biggest difference you see when it comes to how they're integrating this work? Because obviously, with
Yeah.
organizations, there's a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of red tape,
Yeah.
there's a lot of
Yes.
policies and things to go
Mhm.
through before
Mhm.
changes. You can actually see those changes. But I feel like there's more agility when it comes to small business owners, entrepreneurs. What are the big differences that you see when it comes to integrating this work?
Definitely. Well, I would say for organizations, it's just exactly what you talked about. Like the most impactful approaches are usually to go for the policies, the procedures, kind of more of the systemic problems. And especially with the larger organizations, they have hiring to think about, they have HR to think about, they have their communications and marketing department, they have their external brand. They have all of these different um, big areas to focus on that they have to do complex work
Yeah.
to start to unravel things and kind of rebuild and make things more equitable. And so that work is really focused more on changing the systems that already exist. It's not as much about individual work, where a lot of times when I work with small businesses, it's about their marketing messaging. It's about the leadership development of the person who is either the solo entrepreneur or leads a small team or even a larger team, but they really have to work on like what do they believe? Are they sharing their values? Are they leading appropriately? Are they having things like feedback mechanisms? What are they doing to share that they actually care about this work and it's not just something that they've done one time in 2020 and they attended a workshop or they did a one-on-one session with you or me
Mm.
but that's all they did. And so integrating this work, to me, it aligns with sustainability. So do they want to make sure that they are having frequent check-ins and being a part of programs? I recently ran a year-long membership, a really tiny membership. And one of my clients is a very well-respected coach, and she's like, this work changed the way that I do business because I'm realizing that DEI can be integrated in all areas. When I'm hiring people, I'm hiring my first team member, when I am putting different launch materials out, and also when I'm thinking about like what are my values and how do I want to use those values to filter and take business actions from those values. And it can be integrated into so much of your business, even if you're small, even if it's just you or you have one or two people that work for you. So it's really a more individualized approach at the business level.
Yeah, and so true that big organizations, that's what they're missing, that personal one-to-one individual. It doesn't have to be that you're consulting with one person, but going back to the people and having conversation with them. It's not so much systems and practices and this is what we need to do
Yeah,
and this is the policy we need to update, but we really need to talk about people's implicit biases. We really need to talk
mhm,
about people's belief systems, how they've
right,
grown up and believed what they've had to subscribe to.
right,
What do they do when they go home? What are they
right.
watching? Where are they
Yeah.
giving their dollars to? Because at the end of the day, you
Mhm.
can have all this policies and practices in place, but you just go back home and you default to whiteness, which is the dominant culture. And as much as you're trying to do the right thing, there are things that are implicitly in you that you have no idea that you're doing. And I feel like where we could potentially make the biggest impact and the biggest shifts is within organizations, but also that is where there is the most resistance.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think there's so much room for effort, and I've never run into an organization who has it 100% right ever. They're always changing and growing and evolving and getting new leadership and getting new
Yes.
hires and employees, figuring out what to do with certain employees who are causing harm,
Mhm.
figuring out how to share their message, figuring out how to evolve with their values. And um, the systemic approach is usually quite a bit slower. And so, but that's good. It's okay to make slow progress and slow growth,
Mhm.
because a lot of times there is a lot of resistance to implementing some of these practices where, if you were to have a conversation with someone just, casually, you'd be like, oh yeah, of course there should be a better maternity policy. Of
Yes.
course that there should be a more flexible options for parents at work. Oh, of course, we want to make sure we're not excluding our trans employees. Like,
Mhm.
not like, yeah, like it seems like not, it seems like absolutely we want to do that, but there's a lot of politics and there's a lot of not visuals, but there's a lot of perceptions that have to be
Yes.
managed at the organizational level
Mm.
around, oh, are we doing too much? Are we doing too much radical, too soon stuff? When a lot of it's really just basic human rights, which always
There you go.
blows my mind that I'm like, it's
Yes.
just a human right that we would want to treat people
Mhm.
um, in a way where they can thrive, right? We want to give everyone the tools so they can actually thrive and
Yeah.
not just sink at work. Because if you sink at work, the company sinks too. So
Absolutely, it does. And it's so interesting that you say that about, putting the human first, because within corporate, we're so tied down to the language of, this is what's best practice. This is best
yeah,
practice, but best practice according to who? Who set those rules?
right.
Who did they have in mind when
Yeah,
best
yeah,
practice was put into place? Like
right.
having, you have to have your hair a certain way, you have to dress a certain
Yes.
way. And
Yeah,
what if you don't have access to that? Or what if that's not naturally how you are? And
yeah,
so, yeah, it's humanizing the process. Is this the human way to do it? Is this seeing people and allowing them to bring themselves without having to feel like they have to be somebody else to fit in? How can we help them
right.
to belong? How can we embrace them so
Mhm.
that they belong? And I think that will always be an ongoing piece of work
Right.
within larger organizations. But coming back to us within the coaching industry, I listened to such a beautiful episode that you did last year on your podcast, and it was
Mhm.
talking about the future that you envision for the coaching industry.
Yeah.
And in particular, you got into some really meaty conversation around the inequitable practices that you're seeing within coaching. I would love us to talk about that because I know this is where the whole inequitable pricing emerges, the
Yeah.
whole predatory pricing behavior that you spoke about. I'd really like us to dive into that. If you could just share what future, or even before we get to the future, perhaps what are those inequitable practices that you've witnessed and continue to see?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, such a good question. Yeah, there's so many. I would say mostly it's pricing. So there's a lot of privilege in the coaching industry. So I mean, there's a very clear divide around who's making the biggest waves, I should say, like financially, and also like who's getting the most access to opportunities, really. And so I've seen certain coaches uh, promote practices that are harmful to
Mhm.
those who have less financial security. I've seen coaches who they've decided, like, this is the way I've been taught, so I'm just going to keep perpetuating the same thing. This is just like you mentioned, the best practices. And who are we learning the best practices from?
Yeah.
And usually, actually, I really truly believe, my theory is that a lot of coaches have typically learned from white men on how to price, and how to add urgency, add FOMO, add scarcity.
Fact.
And
Yeah.
all of these things are like, if you know the tenets of white supremacy culture, these are the tenets. Literally, they align super well with white supremacy culture. And you're like, oh, wait, like when you start to learn a little bit more, you're like, why does it feel bad to like have scarcity and say I have 2 spots open for coaching, even if I have 15? Like, why does it feel bad to like only have this course open for 15 days and then you close it out? It's not for sale anymore. And you're like, why does that, that kind of goes against what I've been taught. And I think what's happening is that a lot of there's a lot of people who sorry. There's a lot of people who are feeling like, oh, wait, these things from 2018, 2019, 2020, they're really not applying to me and my values anymore. So how do we stop that? Like, how do we stop doing some of these inequitable practices?
Gosh, you've just hit the nail on the head there. There are practices that have emerged, and I think we've, in some ways, piggybacked behind them and gone like,
Yeah.
oh, if that's what's helping sell, then maybe that's the kind of messaging I
Yeah.
should adopt to, so that maybe I can see
Right.
a little bit of traction in my business. And what will be interesting to know is, as you support people with their messaging, what are some of the things that you're seeing, or the things that come up with some of your clients? Because we've subscribed to a system that, whether knowingly or unknowingly, has been incredibly harmful. It has rewarded the
Mm,
rich, as I was saying in the beginning of our conversation when we started
mhm.
recording, and it has penalized those who are not financially in a financial who are able to afford it. And it could be because of being historically excluded. There are so many things tied to it. And so we continue to perpetuate that system. We continue to elevate those who have already been elevated, and we continue
Yeah.
to add that gap. The gap just becomes bigger and
Mhm.
bigger and bigger. And especially for those businesses that are service-led businesses, that
Yeah.
are heart-centered, that are all about change, making change, you end up subscribing to something that is not
Yeah.
aligned with your values, because that's what you are seeing. Sometimes you
Yeah.
cannot be something that you cannot see. And that is why your
Mm,
voice, I have found, has been so empowering to me, to
mm,
kind of keep me uh, grounded within my values. Because as much as I do this
mm,
work of racial equity, and I teach
mhm.
and I educate, I'm also human at the end of the day. And if I'm around coaches and people who are successful, and these are the matrix, and this is what they're using to kind of
Mhm.
um, grow, then you're like, okay, what can I do to adopt, adjust?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, when it comes to messaging, like what I usually tell clients, or what I audit and kind of look out for, is the amount of privilege that, and how they're framing their privilege inside of the way they talk about themselves. So, how they tell their stories on their emails, how they talk about themselves on their website, how they just casually create reels, or Instagram posts or whatever. If they're like, I started from the bottom and I pulled my
Mhm.
bootstraps up and I just got to work and I had no help, meanwhile living in mommy's basement and getting 3 home cooked meals with and not having any kids, like
Yeah.
that's a different experience. So I love coaching entrepreneurs on how to acknowledge some of the privilege that they have, and to call that out, to say, yes, I absolutely worked hard, But here are some caveats. Here are some areas that I have had a leg up. And that has been really hard for a lot of people that I've coached, where they're like, it takes them a little bit to like really understand that. Like, yes, it's a yes, and yes, you worked hard and you had things.
Yeah.
Yes, maybe you inhabit a body that has typically been more privileged, right? Like maybe you are a blonde white woman, an attractive blonde white woman, and you
Mm.
have been invited to every single opportunity, every single speaking opportunity, because of that. Part of it is the way you look. Yes, you're probably excellent, but part of it is the way you look. And um, it's a hard pill for some people to swallow, but I always like to start there. Like, how are you talking? How do you describe you? And what are the identities that you center on?
Yes.
And what are the identities that you just don't even think about, which are
Mm.
areas of privilege? Yeah.
That is so interesting that you say that, because in my course, represented on in the first module, one of the things we talk about is your identity. What are the things, what are the three areas that come up for you when you think of your identity? Is it your race? Is it your gender? Is it your age? Your education? For a lot of white women who come through the course, which is primarily, targeted and geared towards white women, their race never comes up for them. But for the women of color, race is right at the top. It's top
Right.
three. And so that is so interesting that we can be the same gender, or
Mhm.
identify in the same way in some ways, but be totally different in how we see ourselves, and how
Yeah.
um, we have been brought up to see ourselves, but more so what the world has said about us. And so we focus on certain things, which I found so interesting. And so you doing that practice and that exercise, which I believe would bring about quite a bit of resistance. But once they're through that,
Oh,
they're able to tell a more authentic story about
right.
um, how they got there, but more so about being able to support people to build their businesses, because we're all different. We all have
Yeah.
different access points. What you're accessible to, I may not be accessible to. And so, how can I still have a business that grows and is successful based on your expertise as a coach in this particular area, knowing that I don't have the same privilege that you do? And so that whole storytelling that is transparent, because people will say, I've made 100K for 2024. And that is great. That's brilliant. Go you. But a lot of times, this is money that hasn't even come in yet. Maybe these are people who have said they're interested in your
Yeah.
program, they have made a down payment, but how it is being promoted and advertised and used is not a true story. Like, maybe you will
Right.
hit that
Right.
maybe in the next 24 months, depending on how long your payment plans are. But
Right.
how the story is told, it makes you believe that they have that in the bank right now. What am I
Yeah.
doing wrong? What am I getting wrong? What is wrong with
Yeah.
me and my business model?
Right. Yeah. What's wrong? And that's why I think context is so important. I think that like context is inclusive. If you are sharing context about your story, your launch, transparency, like transparency, context, like whenever you can add that, and no one's asking you to like share your whole traumatic past or anything, that like is really deep and you're working through in therapy. Nobody's asking you that. But as a business owner, I think we kind of have responsibility to be transparent, especially if we're leading with money. If our main marketing is around how much money that we make, well, we sure should be transparent about how that money is being made, or really like what is the breakdown. And I have seen a trend. I do want to say that I have seen a trend, a positive trend, where I see people breaking it down more often. It's not my favorite way of leading ever. Like sharing your income is a personal decision, but like
Yeah.
having that be the main way that you market your business is just, I think, not my favorite. But yeah, there's people who absolutely do it. And I think there's some people who do it well and they are very transparent. They're like, oh yeah, this is how much, especially like finance bloggers and things like that. I adore looking at their budget breakdowns and, or if they have a planner that they sold and how the launch went. I am all
Yeah.
about the behind the scenes
Yeah.
transparency. Like that is the kind of content I adore.
Let's talk about predatory behavior, predatory pricing. What
Yeah.
is that? Give us, an insight into this. And is it something that is still playing out, do you believe?
Yes. So I think predatory pricing is still best practice in the
Mm.
coaching industry. And when I say best practice, I mean a lot of people still do that and default to that as what they should do based on what their coach has told them or based on what their peers are doing. They're just looking and seeing what everybody else is doing. Okay, well,
Yeah.
they're doing it. It's fine. It's cool. And so I would define predatory pricing as pricing that just like you mentioned earlier, it rewards people for having financial access and it punishes people who do not have financial access or even one step further, like predates, like it targets people who really don't have financial access and says, oh, cool, you can have a payment plan, you can have these things, but the payment plan has interest on it.
Yes.
And so, or, predatory pricing also in some cases can be like a pay in full bonus, right? Um, Things like that, where those still are very much widely practiced and widely celebrated. I've seen so many posts, I see less of them now this year of celebrating pay in full clients, and just be like, I got a paid in full client. Yes. And the person who's paying that, like, I don't know. I don't know what kind of body they have. I don't know who they are, but more than likely they have enough financial privilege to put something on a credit card or take out of a savings or borrow money from someone or get a business loan. They're able to access those where historically people who have less financial access are not able to participate. And so, yeah, when you're punishing people for not having money in their bank account, that's predatory pricing. I'd also sometimes group in like scarcity, FOMO, um, all of those things as well.
Yeah, I'm listening to you share that, and I'm thinking about the fact that sometimes people do pay in full because they don't want to be penalized. They're like, I don't want to pay
Yes.
extra,
I don't want to
I'd
pay
rather
that
pay
20% extra.
exactly. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's even more than that. I'd rather pay the 500 today, even though it's such a stretch
Yeah. Yeah.
and then pay the 680 in the
Yeah.
long haul. So I'll
Right.
squeeze and make that payment
Yeah.
500. And so
Right.
yeah, it does force you to do something that you probably wouldn't do, go without certain things that maybe you would have wanted to have in order
Yeah.
to make this work. And then
Right.
because business is ongoing and practices continue to change and evolve, that program will still be there. And they might have a sale, maybe 6 months down
Yeah.
the line where it's half price and you're like, oh, wow, So things
Yeah.
continue to change. And you do feel that sting of, wow, I was made to feel a certain way. And the urgency wasn't really genuine urgency. But I was made to, invest in something whereby had I paced myself, it would have probably worked better for me.
Right. Definitely. Yeah. I think there's a lot of people who do exactly that. They just would prefer to pay in full because they know that there's going to be a 20% extra surcharge to, from the business owner. And they're just looking to just pay it, just be done with it. And I think agency is really important. As business owners, we have to offer people agency to make their own decisions. So I think the problem with a lot of predatory pricing is it's steering people into one way to try to, psychology of or seller psychology, buyer psychology, that's what I'm trying to say, of pushing them into a certain way. You want to push them into the pay in full, even if it's not what's best for them. But instead, if you give agency to the people that you're selling to, if you are saying, hey, like I have like this is my main um offering, and here's the pay in full price. I've seen some people say like, here's a pay in full price, here's a payment plan, contact me for additional payment plans if none
Mhm.
of these fit your needs. And that is one of my favorite approaches. Like, you get a pay in full, you get a payment plan, you get the door open just in case neither of those work for you. And that is like my recommended way to usually go about it. It's not
Mhm.
to say that if someone pays in full that you are a bad person for
Yes, yes, of
offering
course.
that. It's more that like you need to give them the agency, meaning you need to give them the choice of doing what's best for them,
Mm.
and making sure that they have the autonomy to say like, a payment plan is better for me. And for me, I've had people pay in payment plans, I've had people pay in full. um it's whatever works best for them, and I try not to get too attached to, oh, I need 4 pay in fulls this month to keep my lights on. Like, that's that's not, you shouldn't be planning your business that way.
No, no, no.
But that's another
You
conversation.
shouldn't, but it does happen. You shouldn't,
Yeah,
but it does
yeah,
happen. What would you say then, are equitable practices? So we've spoken about the inequities in the coaching
yeah,
industry. What would you say are some of the equitable practices, and more so thinking about that future within
yeah.
the coaching industry, that coach who is doing the most to be inclusive? What are some of those practices?
Yeah, I think that equitable practices are removing added interest that is, from our head. I obviously, there's things like processing fees, payment fees. We can't control those, but I'm talking about if you have a payment plan, adding 20% on to the
Mhm.
payment plan is inequitable. So I would like to see like no interest for payment plans. I would like to see multiple different ways of paying. I would also like to see some of these like really bigger coaches offer some additional like equitable methods like scholarships and sliding scale, sponsorships, things like that. Like, there's a lot of really creative ways to fund programs and to be able to give um, different spots away for free. I would like to see more and more of that. Instead of it just kind of being a secret that there's a scholarship, like I would like to see it talked about. Instead of like, oh wow, this is like a secret thing, and you have to really know someone to know someone to opt into that, which is an access problem. So, and I dream of a world where yeah, I just don't see as much urgency, FOMO, first person to buy, pay in full only celebration. Are you even a coach if you don't invest in your business type of messaging?
Yes.
Like, I would love to see some of that in the industry, like see some of that shift, and a lot more agency and autonomy given to clients where they don't have to feel pressured. They don't have to feel that they have to send a million obligations to get out of a sales call. I think that to be inclusive, it means that you're also thinking about what your client needs, not just what you need.
Absolutely. Hearing everything you're saying and being in that position where, yes, I launch, I do have, an opening day and a closing day. I do have, if you buy by this time, you will get this. And so for me, this is work that I also I'm learning. I'm trying to see how am I doing it in a way that is as accessible as possible. Have always had scholarships, have always had conversations with people who want to come along and maybe cannot afford it. And so just trying to see what are the ways I can still make this work with a model that I have, because I have a launch model which has an open and a close date. How do I do that without taking away people's agency?
Right. Yeah, that's tough.
It's
But it's possible. It's 100%
it's
possible.
tough, but
Yeah.
it is possible. Absolutely. It is tough, but it is possible. There are ways in which you can still do it and still do it with integrity. Let me say.
Right.
Um,
Absolutely.
I will, I'm wondering now, in terms of the practical ways some of your clients have been successful in maintaining their momentum in keeping inclusion work a priority, because there's a lot of knee-jerk reactions that we see
Mhm.
happen, particularly when headlines are, headlining.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
People kind of want a refresher, or they're investing in this work. What have you seen as some of the practical ways your DEI clients have been successful in maintaining this and just keeping up that momentum?
Yeah, so I would say like one of the best ways to sustain momentum and that they've been sustaining momentum is through like integrating DEI into their goals. So a lot of us have like business goals, a lot of us have revenue goals. Um but especially clients, I tend to work with a lot of clients who have like memberships or communities or kind of a signature bigger program, and so I encourage them to start making goals around DEI within their membership or within their program, making goals like sharing the program's values, sharing a
Mhm.
code of conduct, sharing, being transparent about the numbers in terms of like diversity, making sure that they're updating their language periodically and actually having goals around that so they can actually look back and check to see like, are we making any progress, or are we just doing a one-on-one session or a workshop once a year, and that's just not as effective as integrating it into the overall goals of the company or the individual's business.
Mm. Now, that is some really, really sound advice, having DEI goals.
Yeah.
Uh, just changing gears slightly now. You were on television very, very recently.
Yes.
You were interviewed on television,
Yeah.
and obviously, with everything that's going on in the United States, this work has again gotten, center stage. And I'm just curious to know, and I know you've answered this question probably multiple times now, but as a DEI consultant, how do you feel about the term DEI hire that's being used to describe a presidential candidate?
Yeah, I think, well, it's racist. I think it's racist. I think the term DEI hire is just turning into more of a slur that you don't belong here. If it's mainly towards people of color, it's mainly towards the global majority, Black and Brown people who occupy positions of power. It is something that has been said around like the president of the United States. You can't get to be the president of the I'm sorry, not the president, the vice president. You can't
Yeah.
be the VP of the USA if you haven't gone to school and led appropriately and been a leader, and most of them are attorneys.
Yes.
And so our VP is a former attorney general. Like, you can't just walk in there and say like, hey, I am a Black person and I am also an Indian woman as well, and I think I deserve this seat because of this. That doesn't happen. Usually the opposite happens. We
Yeah.
have to prove and work twice as hard in order to even be considered for these roles
Yeah.
and fight against people who, 40 years ago, they were saying you're an affirmative action hire.
Hmm.
And now affirmative action hire is being replaced with DEI. Like, oh, you're only here because of DEI. And that's not true. DEI is honestly only in the past 10 years has become main spread. And her career started way, way before that was even something that was widely recognized. So it's an insult to anyone, who you're calling a DEI hire. It just says that they are not qualified, that discredits their achievements, and it's honestly hurtful and harmful.
Yeah. Hurtful and harmful keywords there.
Yeah.
we're getting to the end of our conversation now, Simone, and I have to ask the question. The demand for this work has really, really changed over the past
Mhm.
4 years, from when you had that sold out workshop where people were like, yep, sign me in.
Yeah, right.
Um, has that, where we are today, has that
Mhm.
impacted you in any way? And is the current political climate helping in any way, or is it just making things
Mhm.
worse?
Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, the demand has slowed a lot, for me personally and for so many of my peers where, in 2020, even 2021, there was always a lead in the inbox. There was always a phone call. There was always some potential business happening. And a lot of that, for me personally, has dried up. And while I'm able to work with some pretty amazing clients still, it's very, very slow. So getting creative around the kind of clients I want to work with is a thing. It's not just coming to me as easily as it was. So that's been a big mental shift of, hey, you really care about this work, you're gonna go have to find it. You're gonna have to talk about it a little bit
Yeah.
more because people just aren't coming in droves the same way, or organizations have dropped a lot of their commitments. We've seen different organizations who are literally saying, we're not focusing on this anymore. This
Yes.
is something that we are going to maybe not even shut down, but this is something that we're not really doing anymore, or this is something that we just believe having a good workplace, it'll naturally all fall together. And which is a big mistake. But when it comes to money, profit, funding, that is always what a big organization is going to be focused on. They care about the bottom line. They don't necessarily care about the most human approach.
Yeah. So true. And so, Simone, if fear was not a factor, how do you think it would show up in your work?
Gosh, what a good question. I'd probably show up like more often. Yeah, if fear wasn't, I think I would be a little bit more, um, yeah, a little bit more bold with my messaging, a little bit more bold with what I talk about. I am feeling a shift where, um, it's time to talk about like some of the other things that are going on in the world. I think the online coaching business bubble is very bubble-y. It's very confined, and it can be really just easy to just talk about what you're seeing in there. And I'm like, I want to be global. I mean, we're global right now. You're in Australia, right? And
Yeah.
so, like I would like to kind of step outside of that
Mhm.
comfort zone. And I'm working on some of that fear around being seen,
Mhm.
and around just being okay with having people perceive me however they're going to perceive me, I think is something that I'm working on. So if I didn't have that fear, maybe you'd be seeing me, I don't know, somewhere else, Brazil or somewhere else doing a training or something. I don't know. But I think, yeah, that's what no fear would look like for me.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that so vulnerably and so openly with me. I
Mhm.
really appreciate that because a lot of people shy away. They're like, fear, what is fear? I have no fear. I'm doing what I was called to do. And I'm like, wow, good you. That is so
Yeah,
good. I'm not there yet. I battle
me
with fear
neither.
every day and I have to show up in
Yeah,
some way. And so
right.
thank you so much for sharing that. Now, how or where can people find you? I know there's a particular program. So listen up. There's a particular program that Simone is collaborating with somebody else called Pricing Pleasure. I hope I got that right.
Hmm. You
Uh,
did. Yeah.
and I'm going to pop a link in the show notes for people to find out a little bit more and get on the wait list. But could you just share a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, so Pricing Pleasure is a program designed specifically for entrepreneurs. It works very, very well for service-based entrepreneurs who have some sort of service that they sell. And it's kind of two main ends. It's setting your own abundant salary that really has your own cup filled in terms of financially, like how to go at it in a way that is aligned with your values, that is equitable. So like, how do you really make sure that your own needs are met fully? How do you make sure that you have this amazing salary where you're not just making a ton of money, but you're also you're keeping your money. You're making sure that you are not becoming a statistic of one of the many business owners who have to close their businesses because they're not making enough, they're not taking home enough. So that's part one. And then part two of the program is, once you are really making enough, how are you starting to be more equitable with your pricing? And how are you making sure that you are utilizing things like scholarships, payment plans? And it really is for every entrepreneur. Like, if you're not quite, making as much as you want, like, there are tools. And I partner with a hypnotherapist who is amazing. It's like she has like a somatic hypno track. She has, or hypnotherapy track. She has meditations in there. Like, it's kind of the bridge between like the spiritual, feeling really good and feeling really worthy about your prices, and also the practical, which is how to implement equitable pricing methods. So it's a pretty cool program, and there's nothing really like it, honestly.
Yeah.
I am biased, but like, I've never seen anything that has all of that in there. It's a healing program. I truly believe it is. It gives people permission to charge their full rate and not, undercharge, because undercharging is not equitable pricing at all. Undercharging doesn't help you, and it doesn't help your clients either. So you have to find that sweet spot between not undercharging and like charging a fair rate, but also making sure that you're not up into the ceiling and you're, charging 3 times the amount of the market rate. Like, that's also inequitable. So finding the sweet spot, and also making sure that you're utilizing any equitable pricing that you can based on where your business is at the moment.
Brilliant. So finding a balance, that will be in the link in the show notes. Where can people connect with you, Simone?
I'm mostly on Instagram, but I'm dipping my toes in LinkedIn. So we'll see.
All right.
I'm trying to dip the little baby toe in. So we'll see. But yeah, I'm mostly on LinkedIn, or sorry, well, Freudian slip. I guess I'll be on LinkedIn. Simone McNish. And then you can find me on Instagram. That's kind of my more social hangout spot. And I'm at simone.mcnish. So yeah, I share a tiny bit of my life and business stuff there. And yeah, you can connect with me there. Send me a DM.
All right, beautiful. Simone, thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful having this conversation with you. And please come back again, will ya?
Oh, I definitely will. This has been so fun.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Why don't you go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a review so this podcast can reach more online business owners, and together we can begin to normalize racial inclusion in the online coaching space. I'd love to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where this podcast episode was recorded, the Wiradjuri people in central New South Wales, Australia. Music produced in Nairobi, Kenya by Patrick St. P. Mbaru and Kambua Mathu. Vocals by Joanne Matata.
Represented from coast to coast.